My name is Shara Kingston. I brought in a ditty bag belonging to James Holland.
At the onset of the First World War, Nova Scotia engaged in provincial-wide recruitment efforts to establish infantry battalions and supplement Canada's standing army and militias. The 85th Battalion, also known as the Nova Scotia Highlanders, was authorised on September 14, 1915, as one of the two entirely volunteer-based units. Its 4 companies trained in Halifax and added 3 additional units before travelling overseas. Their first frontline experience transpired on Hill 145 Vimy Ridge, where instead of providing non-combat support, they squared off against the Germans. With formidable tenacity, the 85th Battalion helped seize the ridge. Efforts made there and throughout Europe would earn them the nickname, the Never Fails, and a memorial in northern France where their legacy began.
Shara, welcome to Militaria, and can you tell us what you brought in today from the Army Museum?
Absolutely. So I brought in what is known as a ditty bag, which is this bag here, with some ephemeran items that were inside the ditty bag. And it belonged to a Lieutenant Holland who served with the 85th.
And that's the 85th Canadian Infantry Battalion from the First World War. So, as you say, we have the ditty bag here, which was like basically a hold-all bag for things that you needed to keep your uniform together. And in it he had a spare set of hose flash. There was part of a formation patch, the top half. 2 cotter pins here. The cotter pins were used to hold the shoulder titles on, or the collar badges on, or even a cap badge. These 2 items there are for the sides of the tunic, and they were to hold the belt in place, so they assisted so it didn't slip down too far. And then of course we have the ubiquitous buttons that were used for whatever. They're not a button that I recognize, but it doesn't mean if you lost a button it wouldn't do the trick. So how did we obtain this item?
So this was one of the items, again, that we call it found in the collection, as we're not sure how it came to us, but using our detective skills, the fact that he signed his bag, we were able to start to parcel out the bit of the story.
So Shara, what do we know about Lieutenant Holland?
Well, we know that he enlisted with the 185th, and then he was transferred to the 85th after the 185th disbanded. We know that he became a lieutenant, and we know that he was shot in the ear in 1916 and sustained a pretty severe kind of ear and head wound, and was on leave for a while to recuperate from that. We also know that he was killed because someone wrote on his ditty bag, "killed" with the date, which is how we were able to kind of piece together who he was and a little bit more of his story. He was killed in the last 100 days, which is pretty devastating.
And then the other interesting thing was the fact that in a service file are all the documents for his officer selection. Someone must have saw something in Holland that said he should be an officer as opposed to a private, put him in front of an officer selection board, and they decided, yep, you need to be a lieutenant in the 85th Battalion, and that's how he became a leader and a platoon commander in the 85th. So Shara, what have you been able to find out about Holland and his service and any of the wounds he received, that sort of thing?
From what I have gathered from his records, but also there's a really great account of the 85th Battalion where each day is almost written about, and people are mentioned very specifically, is that Holland was the guy that would take charge and do what he was asked to do, but that when he's shot in the ear, he just wants to get back into the field. And he wasn't just like zinged, it was a, flesh into the head where they said, please take some time off. And he did a little bed rest, but he kept saying, I'm ready, I can keep going. So that says something about his determination, his courage, the fact that he understood that he had a job to do. Yeah, that's as far as I know, shows his courage.
Yeah, and the last 100 days, of course, was the last 100 days of the war, and that's when things sort of started getting moving, in that there was the Canadian Army and well, in fact, all of the Allies were at a point where they were able to advance and pursue the Germans, and make ground and advance. And that's where you see some of the last cavalry charges, because the Army was actually moving and the Canadian Corps was moving. They were able to use the cavalry brigade in cavalry charges because things were moving so fast and they were on open ground and they weren't all bogged down into the mere and mud and stuff. So it was a different fighting then. You know, that's when tanks were able to be used to their utmost, and it wasn't a good easy go, mind you. It was still horrible slogging, but at least they were going in the right direction. It wasn't the early days of the war where you would advance and lose half of a battalion for 10 feet.
Right.
You know, this was moving along quite well. And, you know, again, as you were saying about Holland, you know, when I was reading the medical portion, it kept saying, yes, he's back again, and you know, he says he's ready to go, and we'll have another inspection of his ear. But it sure sounded to me when I was reading through that there wasn't much of his ear left.
No.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sure that if he didn't want to come back, they may have found something else for him to do. But he seemed to have that dedication and wanted to get back, and there's probably a lot of camaraderie going on too, that, you know, those were his soldiers and he wanted to get back to his soldiers and look after his men. So he seemed to be quite the leader. This item came out of storage, obviously, and before it goes back into storage, what are your plans to stabilize it, or is there anything that really needs to be stabilized?
So because this all came as a grouping, I would never break this up. So we make sure that everything is bagged individually or